All right, we are recording. You should see it pop up. There we go. Okay, we're ready.
Thank you so much for everyone for joining us on this May virtual meeting for Puget Sound Beekeepers Association. It's a beautiful week for bees, and I hope everyone is doing well and feeling well and enjoying their bees and learning lots. I'd like to introduce Krista Connor, who's a journeyman beekeeper who has been involved with our club for many, many years. She's kind of a foundation pillar for us, so it's a thrill to have her teaching a spring, summer, what to be ready for this time of year. And I'll turn it over to Krista now. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Kit. So if you missed my introduction earlier, I'm Krista Connor. I'm keeping bees probably since 2008. So quite a while, but still definitely learning things. Can you guys hear me okay? I'm getting a little feedback from my own voice.
Yeah, I'm muting people that look like they're picking up.
Okay. I think my mic just might be too loud.
No, I think someone's got
can you see my screen, the Puget Sound Beekeepers Association presentation?
Yeah.
Yes, and you sound great to me. Yes, and you sound great to me, Krista.
All right, cool. I'm going to rely on Jeff because I lost the whole Zoom window. So just pipe up, Jeff, if there's somebody with a question.
Okay.
If you see it in the chat. Bless you. So this presentation, this is content that actually Kathy and Tracy put together. So I appreciate that. It's been used in the past, and it's also available on our website under the, I think it's the resources tab. We have all of our monthly lesson content there. It may change if we have stuff to add to it each month, but anyway, just know that you can still access it there. And so this month we're going to talk about, we got our packages or we got our nukes going, but now what? So let me see how to go forward. All right. So some probably feeding your bees still, and right now you want to be using the 1-to-1 sugar to water ratio, and it's by weight. So always make sure you're doing that, and make sure you use just plain white sugar. A lot of people were thinking, well, I'll use brown sugar, organic sugar, or I'll use honey from the store. And it's like, no, those are not good for your bees and can make them sick, actually. And so always look up the instructions too. You shouldn't be boiling the sugar water combination. It's just get the water hot enough so that the sugar goes into solution. As Kathy mentioned, you want to be using pollen patties for spring buildup. Our nectar flow, which is May nectar flow, which is blackberry, is going to be happening probably in 3 or 4 weeks. So you really want to have as much forager population in your hive, and so both the sugar and the pollen are going to help that. And the sugar right now is really going to be more conducive to building of comb. So a lot of you are probably starting off with just foundation, and so to save the bees energy from gathering nectar to build that comb, then the sugar water can be used instead. It's right there in the hive. Excuse me. You'll see in the upper right corner an example of a feeder box, and you can pour sugar or sugar syrup in there. Or I don't like those personally because you have to lift it off the hive every time you inspect. I use mason jars turned upside down with the sugar syrup in it. I'm not going to cover the fall stuff. That will be covered in a later month. Is everybody still feeding your colonies? And they can take it down pretty quickly. So keep an eye on it and make sure they always have some sugar syrup available. Once a better nectar source comes available, they'll start ignoring the sugar syrup, and it'll just sit there. You can take it out at that point. All right, I'm going to move on to what do you do now if you're going into your hive. If you haven't been a beekeeper for long, each time is probably a little bit of a psychological experiment and courage, doing it by yourself. But the number one thing is every time you go into the hive, have a goal. So every time you go in there, write it down. It's like, I want to see the queen. I want to see, eggs, larvae, drones, whatever it is that you're wanting to accomplish that day, write it down, and that's your goal. And once you achieve that goal, you want to get out of the hive pretty quickly. I limit my hive inspections to probably less than 20 minutes if I'm somebody. After that, the bees start getting a little bit defensive, and you'll notice that by the sound that they make. They get a little bit louder. They may start pinging your face veil. So just pay attention to the bees' behavior. You'll know, that you've been in there a little bit too long. So like I said, bring tools and a notebook for taking notes during your inspection. We also have on our website an inspection log, and there's many out there. I suggest you go and find one that works for you. It is kind of a personal, you got to find what works, because it's like I've been through so many different iterations of trying to use an online tracker, using just a notebook, but it's like, it's just all personal. So I can't say go to any one particular inspection log and it's going to be the best. But anyway, we do have an example on our website under the resources tab. I would also advise to always have extra woodenware on hand. Inevitably, you're going to either need to split your hive, or they're going to put on more nectar into the hive than you anticipated, and you want to have that woodenware and all your frames ready to go. Especially right now, it's a little hard to get woodenware and frames. I had an order that's been sitting out there from Man Lake due to the virus stuff. They haven't been shipping as timely as they have in the past. So just be aware of that. When you do inspect your hives, you want to do it on a warm day, preferably if over 55 degrees, which hasn't been a problem lately, but you don't want to go out there in the evening when it's rainy or cold. It's not going to be a pleasant experience for you or the bees. You'll find out that the hard way. They'll probably be apt for stinging you. So a warm day, over 55, preferably not windy. And I always stand behind the hive and work it from the back or the side. And I take any gear, when I take gear off, I personally put it in front of the hive. You don't want to stand up there for a prolonged period, but I keep all of the bee related items up in front of the hive, and that way I have kind of a bee-free zone behind or beside the hive for me to stand and feel like I'm not in the middle of them swirling around. Already talked about avoid rain or wind. And also when you're taking your notes, take them, even if you're just mentally got 2 hives, it's not too hard to remember things sometimes. So just write it down as soon as you get done. It's also great if you have a helper, somebody that's interested, if they're able to go in the inspection with you and take notes while you're doing your thing. So approaching your hives for your inspection actually starts when you're walking up to the hives. You really want to pay attention to the surroundings, and are there bees crawling on the grass in front of your hive? Are they bearding or hanging out on the front of the hive? Are there yellow jackets or other signs of pests that have been bothering the hive? If it's like a rodent or raccoon or something, you might find scratches on the front of your entrance. And then if they're a little bit testy, the bees more defensive on a regular basis, it can be because they're pestered by yellow jackets or something. So pay attention to those kind of signs of, I guess, predators or pests of the bees. And yellow jackets, I also had hives that were taken out last year from yellow jackets. So I do suggest you have some sort of plan to have screens or a way to keep your yellow jackets in control and out of the hive. Let's see. Mentions orientation flights. These are signs of a hive swarming. If you're just doing packages and nukes, I doubt you're going to be having that situation going on, but an orientation flight's going to look like they're doing circular acrobats in front of the hive. But just another thing to observe and watch for, especially if you're have an overwintered hive and it's pretty large, they could be ready to swarm. Ants or beetles. I haven't ever seen a small hive beetle, but they do exist in Washington. And there's traps you can get for those, but ants can be a problem, especially if you're feeding sugar syrup. I usually just brush them off. I haven't done anything for that in the past, but you can look online. There's different methods of putting oil cans and your hive stand legs down in that, and the ants can't get past it. But generally, they haven't been too much of a problem to even require that in my experience. Let's see. Oops. You guys still with me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, Krista.
Just checking. Just checking.
I've seen those little tiny ants under the inner cover before. So like putting a few drops of mint or cinnamon helps a lot with those too.
Okay. Yeah, I've heard black pepper too can help throw off their scent. And bees and ants are the same.
If you ever have ants
Go
like
ahead.
that around the hive, those bees are always angry.
So I opened my hive. This is Kit talking, and they were totally making this crazy little noise. They were like chittering at the ants. It was, and what's been happening for me lately is that the ants want to lay their eggs on the inner cover. So there's little white things with the ants, and they really are causing, I mean, that only once with the chittering, but I tried oil and the bees died in it, so that didn't work. So I'll try some cinnamon oil because I've never had an issue with ants before, but they've really found my apiary.
Yeah, those are good insights and suggestions. Thank you. Let's see. If you have observation boards or sticky boards in your hive, which I do recommend, it's just another way to observe what's going on with your colony. But you can pull that out and see, it's like, are they cleaning out, dead bees or the wax, or you can see mites sometime.
Krista, you still there?
I lost her too.
Political sign there.
We lost you
So it's
there for a moment,
good to
Krista.
observe. Okay. I was just talking about the observation boards or sticky boards that you can put under your colony. I don't know where I dropped off, Jeff. I was just talking about.
It was right about the observation sticky boards.
Yeah. Down in the right corner is an example of an observation board somebody used where it's like an old political sign, or those plastic signs you see in yards. It's easier if you can paint it fully white, but this one's pretty white. But you can see the lines where debris has been dropped down from the bees through the frames. So you can see mites on there. So it's just a good way another way of learning about your hive and what's going on. Another thing to notice before you even open your hive is what is the sound? Are they loud? Can you hear them outside the hive already before opening it up? Those can give you some hints as to what might be going on in the hive. Like if they don't have a queen, they'll typically be louder than usual. So those are things you'd want to make note of in your hive inspection log too. All right, so now we're ready to move on to the inside of the hive when you're doing your inspection. So who has had fun with their smoker and keeping it going? That's usually the problem. You can get it lit, but keeping it going is a different story. So things you can use for smoker fuel or You can buy this cotton batting. Make sure you get something that doesn't have a chemical in it or glues. You don't want to use some of the cardboards have glue in them. You don't, you know, use pine needles are the best, dry ones, leaves, anything that's sitting around. You can buy these little pellets, which I have a hard time getting going. I don't know what the problem is with those, so I'm trying to give them another chance. Anybody else have burlap? Be careful with burlap though. Some of it has these little plastic strands in it, and then also some of it is treated with some chemical that it won't burn. So making sure you get one that's food grade is important. And so why do we smoke? Who can answer that question? Why do we smoke the hive? Anybody want to take a guess?
I will.
Yeah, there. All right.
Okay, so when the bees smell smoke, they think forest fire. I'm going to have to leave my home. I better get some groceries and take it with me. And so they go start eating the honey. They go down in between the frames and they're busy doing that and not paying attention to you. And then it also masks your smell. And I light a smoker mainly to smoke me. If a bee stings me, I smoke where I got stung to stop that pheromone smell from going out and telling more bees to come sting me in the same spot.
Yeah. And I always describe it as, you know, pretend you're at a rock concert and people are yelling, and it's like the smoke gets in the way of us communicating. So it's kind of like the loud music to us. The smoke does that for bees. They can't communicate very well to each other, and so they can't really organize to be as a defensive colony as a, you know, collective colony. And as Kathy mentioned, if you do get stung, the bees give off a pheromone which can smell like bananas. And so sometimes if you squish a bee when you're in the colony, you might start smelling that. And that's a good sign you probably want to tidy up things and get out of the hive. That's my sign. I get it out of there because I'm just annoying them at this point. But if you do smell that, it's a good idea to use your smoker to dissipate it because it is their alert pheromone. And it does smell like bananas. And don't eat bananas around your hive.
Right.
One of the big things new beekeepers want to do, they're like, well, I haven't seen the queen. And I'm like, that's really the least of it's nice when I see the queen, but I'm really kind of playing detective. And it's more like, is there evidence of the queen? So I want to know, even if I have a queen, it doesn't mean she's healthy and laying. She could have a hurt, injured leg and not able to get down into the cell and lay eggs. So you really want to see proof that she's a healthy queen. And so signs of that are egg and larvae. And really make sure you build that capability to see eggs in all conditions. So dark frames, light frames. It can be a little bit harder and tricky at different times of the day. But you want to get the sun coming over your shoulder down into the cells so you can see those eggs. And when you're inspecting, you want to always pretend you don't know really where your queen is at any given point. Experienced beekeepers have the experience of accidentally squishing a queen, which kind of breaks your heart. It's like running over your own cat. And so be very gentle in moving your gear around and your frames around because you don't know where she is and you might squish her at any time. So the gentle stacking of boxes you're not working. Again, I stack those in front of my hive when I'm working. And so when you go into your box for the very top box, you want to make some, I'm assuming everybody's using Langstroth gear, but you want to take out the sidewall frame. And typically your queen's not going to be on that frame. So you want to start there, take it out and rest it on its short end in front of the hive. And so that gives you some working space to move your frames around and not accidentally roll the queen when you're pulling out a frame. So now you have, if it's 10 frame gear, you got 9 frames in the box. You want to work one frame at a time and always just have one big gap. Always have your frames close together, right next to each other, except the gap where you're working. And I say that because the more gaps you have between those frames, the more opportunity is to squish bees. So you just kind of file across like a filing cabinet, pulling up. What I do is I cheat and I look straight down on the side of on the frame. And if there's nothing going on in that frame, I don't bother taking it out. I'll just keep filing across until I see some action going on. And I do want to see if I can share another picture, because one of the things I see a lot of, and it concerns new beekeepers. Can you guys see that picture? Can somebody confirm?
No, we can't see it. Just the team.
Okay,
Nope.
try
Just the PowerPoint.
something else. Hold on. I think I have to share differently. Okay. So one of the things you'll find bees, especially in a new colony and foundation, can you see this now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, is one, the bees, they fill up space with wax comb so that they can get between, it's like a good bridge, they call it bridge comb. And it's really when they haven't had the opportunity to build out the entire frame, they need a way to walk over to that next frame pretty easily. So they build these little bridges. But they can also start building they look like flakes of comb that aren't really, attached. They're maybe attached at one or two spots in the frame. And that's not ideal, and they don't fill that back in. So if I have that going on, I usually clean it. I don't know if Kathy or anybody else has any other suggestions, but I personally take it off, because if it's not straight comb, you're just going to be squishing bees, and it's going to be a mess for the entire season.
I pretty much always take out the burr comb or the bridge comb. I learned it was burr comb, so I don't know if that's just another name for it, I guess. But I usually leave the ladder comb. Then that's what goes between the boxes, because it makes it easier for the queen to get up and down. They do put. Yeah, they do put brood in there, and people freak out when they see that. But the bees will eat up the brood. It's protein, so I don't really worry about it too much. And I will clean that up if it's really big. If it's just a small little bit, I leave it.
I find it helps to have a drone frame in there so that they can put their drone cone somewhere, so they're not trying to cram it all in between the ladder comb. It helps with the ladder comb building. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So you can buy a specific foundation that has larger cells. So Jeff's talking about drone bees, which they typically build the drone cells down along the bottom edge of the frame. But Jeff's saying if you had an entire frame of drones, that helps cut down on some of the wonky comb you'll find. All right, I'm going to go back to my presentation, I hope. All right.
PowerPoint's back up.
Slide smoke. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
BBs.
There's a question in the chat. Kathy's been doing a good job of answering a lot of these, but about do we need to use drone frame to control mites?
It is a method, and if you're diligent about getting the frame out before those drones hatch, yes, it's great. If you're not diligent or you don't know what the heck you're doing, it can become your mite factory. So it's a good.
One of the tricks that I use, Krista, is I put.
Go ahead.
One of the things that I do is I put a piece of painter's tape on the top, and I write the date that the drone comb has been capped off, so that I know by when I need to get it out. Otherwise, you have a mite bomb. And then I put it in a plastic bag and put it in the freezer for 48 hours and feed it to my neighbor's chickens.
All right. You don't just feed it straight to them?
Oh, I can do that, but usually, you know, I'm busy in the bee yard and I don't want to deal with it. I deal with it on a day that I'm not working bees. Have time to chat because you know I can't shut up.
Just know that there are other uses for that drone brood. So feeding it to chickens is great. I'm sure if you just scraped it off, your birds in the area would be interested in it as well. I wouldn't suggest putting it near your hive if you do any scraping or anything.
And if you put it back in, the bees clean it right out. You know, it's not rotted or anything, so they'll eat that protein.
Yeah, so you don't want to invite other like ants or yellow jackets. They'd be interested in that protein. So always keep the area around your hive clean. Like I said, don't worry about finding the queen. It's more like confirming evidence of her and her health. Let's see, work gently and slowly, just very deliberate moves. And even if you have some gear not on the hive yet, I suggest practicing. One of the common moves I see new beekeepers do is they'll hold the frame, which I wish I had one here. They'll hold it with their fingers underneath the end bars, which is fine when you're not ready to put it back in the hive. You're just looking at it. But when you're getting ready to put your frame back in the hive, you really want to hold it with your thumb and forefingers and swivel up so that you're not getting your glove caught under that top bar. And I say that because if the whole frame bounces when you drop it, when you yank that glove out, you'll hear it. The bees will not be happy, and they'll be loud, and it's just a little disturbing to them. So pay attention and play around with maybe empty gear that you have on hand of getting frames out and putting them back in a very smooth fashion. Let's see. And also when you're taking frames out, always make sure you go straight up before you start tilting it to look at it. I see a lot of beekeepers that are new, they'll take the frame, they'll start angling it before they get it out of the box. And that's a good way to squish the queen or bees too. All right, miss anything? So if you don't see evidence of your queen, and you also have, you know, the bees are being loud, and, you know, let's say you weren't sure if you saw eggs or not, maybe go back in a day or two, reconfirm, yeah, there's no eggs. More than likely you need a queen. So we'll see here in a minute, there's several different things you don't want to see in your colony. We talked about feeding. Trying to get straight here with my scrolling. Okay, so what should it look like? You should be seeing on a frame in the center, you're going to have what looks like scrambled egg colored cappings, and that's going to be your worker brood. The drone brood protrudes out. It's still that same color, but it protrudes out a little bit from the surface of the wax comb. So here you see kind of a gradation of, or a progression of development. Out here is going to be eggs. People say they can't see eggs. What I tell them to do is, well, go where you see capped brood and work out to the edge of that, and you'll likely see eggs and larvae in there. And so for 3 days, it's a vertically standing egg. It flips down to a C-shaped.
Krista, I lost you.
Yeah, I lost Krista.
These are probably about to get. Go ahead. Do you have
we
something
lost
to say,
you
Jeff?
when you were talking about the egg standing up and then C-shaped larvae.
Okay. Sorry, I don't know what's going on. I was saying on a single frame, you want to see the progression of capped brood, larva, and the C-shaped end stage of and then the eggs. The eggs are going to be vertically on their end, very tiny specks. And then after 3 days, they flip to a C shape with some royal jelly. So it's that milky white substance. And then these are farther along here where they're, kind of fat larvae that you'll see on, they're still C-shaped, but they're really filling up that cell and about to get capped with wax by the bees. On frames where there's more honey and pollen, you'll see kind of an arch formation. That's a good thing. If you don't see, pollen, brood, pollen, honey, which they need all of those to feed the young, or the brood, there might be a dearth. They might not be able to gather those things. It might be a sign you need to feed them. All right. So here's a good example of the worker brood. See how that's flat? And then here's some drone brood. It's kind of protruding. Still the same color cappings, but definitely different shape and appearance. Other things that you might see, but hopefully you don't, the supersedure cell. And this is a scenario where your queen died or somehow she's not as healthy and she's not giving off as strong of a pheromone. So immediately when the bees sense that, they're like, hey, we need a new queen. And they start building one out of an egg that the existing queen has laid. And they have to find one that's just the right age. Is there a question? All right. So the supersedure cell is going to be on the top third of your frame. And that's so that if the bees had to cluster for any reason, say it got cold all of a sudden, they would still be able to protect and keep this cell warm. So it's an easy way to remember. It's like, okay, if the bees condense around the center of that frame, it's typically that's where your supersedure cells are going to be found. And then down here, they still look the same. It's the same queen cell, but these are swarm cells. And they're typically around the bottom edge or maybe up along the side of the wood on your frame. And these are a sign of health, that the bees are crowded and they want to divide themselves. So it means they're pretty healthy. They're thinking, we got extra resources. We can divide ourselves and create a new whole colony somewhere. And there's also, probably need to do a whole, Kathy's done an entire class on how to manage swarms in terms of splitting hives. I'm not going to be able to cover that today, but just know it's an opportunity for you to create a new hive if you want to. And there's also methods if you don't want to create a new hive.
Krista, can you hear me?
There's also methods to try. Yeah.
Can you also talk about the difference between a queen cup and a queen cell?
Yeah, thank you for calling that out.
And the other thing I might note here is you're not going to have supersedure cells and swarm cells at the same time.
Yeah.
Because I get people get confused by that because they say, oh, well, I've got both, and like you don't. They've just put swarm cells everywhere.
Yeah. Swarm cells, like I said, they're generally towards the outside edges of your frame because it's an optional activity for them to swarm and divide themselves. So if conditions turn weird for bad weather or whatever, they're going to ditch the idea of swarming for a few days and they may not care about those swarm cells anymore. So I always remember it as, if it's in the central part of the frame, it's a supersedure cell. But Kathy raised a good point. A lot of the times people will see these little cups. I don't know if I have any good pictures of that. I'll look for one before we get off this call. But along the bottom edge, typically of the frame, you'll find these. They look like the start of a queen cell, but they're not. They're pretty shallow, and it could be a start of a drone cell, but it's actually a healthy thing that they're building cups and cells. And so a cup is just an empty wax formation there's no egg in it. And a cell actually has an egg in it, and that means they're intending to do something with it. And it could become a queen. You don't know. You might need to watch it, but more than likely it could be a drone. But just be aware that there's a difference in the cups versus a swarm cell. Questions? I got to catch some water here.
Krista, I got just a bunch of garbled. It was really hard to hear what you said.
For that entire thing, oh my gosh. All right. So
I heard
Kathy's
I think maybe Kathy, you got this. Maybe this your connection this time.
You think it's me?
I heard that. I heard Krista's last little bit.
Okay, it's me then. All right, thanks.
All right, good confirmation though. Let's see. All right, so another question. People think, well, I got all this gear. I'm just going to pop it all on at once and be done, save myself some time. What you'll end up with is a lot of empty comb on the edges of your boxes, and the bees will have drawn comb kind of in a column straight up the stack of gear, and that's not what you want. You really want to force them to draw comb on all of your frames in a box, and you can do that one by controlling when you put on a new box, and then rotating frames from the outside or the inside out, so that the comb is drawn throughout the entire box. So here's kind of an example of, this is a well filled out box. You got a pretty large cluster. These are all likely drawn comb. Over here, they're just probably on one or
And I did just lose Krista again.
two frames, and so a new box when eight of those 10 frames are drawn with comb. If you have an 8 gear box, 6 frames are drawn, 2 are not. And when you do add a box, it's nice if you can take a frame from your first box and move it up. Typically, if it's just comb and honey, would be nice. That kind of draws the bees upward into your new gear.
Krista,
All right.
There's a question here. Tina had a swarm move into her box, and they went right to the upper medium box, and they're ignoring the deep. And she wants to know how you encourage them to move down.
Good question. One, congratulations on having some free bees. You didn't have to do anything. That's awesome. As far as getting them to move down, you could temporarily put that medium box as your bottom box, and they will move upward. Another option would be to use a queen excluder to force. Certainly wouldn't be putting any gear above that, above your medium. So you could put your queen excluder on that medium. If you don't have one, I would just rotate the boxes temporarily, but before winter, I'd put them back in order once she's moved down to start laying down there. What I would do, I don't know if anybody else has any other.
Yeah, I think probably my advice is when bees find a new cavity, they always start at the top and they start working their way down because they need that honey. They sort of need to start building the comb, and then that honey gets backfilled into the. Oh, I'm getting feedback from somewhere, but the honey gets backfilled, so then they have that for winter.
Yeah. They'll eventually. I just wouldn't put new gear on until they start going into that box, because you don't want to invite them into new space. So you can't just do nothing at this point. If you haven't added any gear, you could just leave it alone. Eventually, she'll move down. But if she's not, you can kind of force the situation. Does that help?
I wonder if you would talk again about rotating frames so that you said you
About
move them you move the outer empties into the center, or because that breaks up the brood from the center of your hive, the nest. If you'd explain that better.
So one of the things, and this is outlined in the apprentice workbook as well, that you do, as Kit's indicating, you do want to avoid separating your brood. For the most part, there are situations where you do want to separate the brood if they're crowded. But in general, you don't want to stick an entirely empty foundation frame between two brood frames. But what I would do is move it in one frame. So maybe your outer frame that's on the side wall of your box, move that in one position, and that gets the bees interested. Also, if they are paying attention to just one side of a frame, I'll flip it around so that the empty side's closer to the brood, and they'll start paying attention to that.
That's super helpful. Thank you very much. I always get tripped up on that myself.
And once you start putting a new box on, there's also a method of moving frames down and up. So it's kind of like a, I don't know how to describe it, but anyway, I'll try to find a good image of that and share it on our webpage or our Facebook. Other questions?
There are a bunch of comments in here. I think, Kathy, you handled a lot of them. Aline's got a comment here I don't see answered. I'm thinking of putting a hive on my deck. Do I need to put it up on blocks? Thinking of airflow. Also, will my deck get all yucky?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. I don't know what kind of deck you have or how
And
big
then
it is.
you have mustard polka dotted lawn furniture.
Yeah. So just, you want to pay attention to the flight path of the bees. So if putting it on your deck is going to make it where the bees are flying directly into somebody else's yard or their own deck, I would probably advise against it. You're going to get some complaints pretty quickly. If it's not and you're just overlooking a landscape area, I'd say go for it, but you really want to have, depends on how you're using your deck and how large it is. You want to have enough room for you to separate your, if you're just going out there and hanging out on your deck, I would want 6 to 10 feet away from that hive to be comfortable sitting there. If you don't use the deck for anything else, I don't see a reason why not to, but you will.
So
yeah,
Chris,
and
Chris,
if you're out there,
actually,
with your tea and your honey, that might be an issue as well.
it's actually my
Say that again.
It's actually my entry deck, and I'm going to screen.
What?
It's my entry deck.
Okay.
It's my entry deck, and so I'm going to screen the side of it where the stairs are, and my neighbor is really excited about having it right next to their house. So there's no issue there. But my question really is about if it's just sitting literally right on the deck on the wood, is it going to wick water up? Should I have it up off on blocks? For airflow or for moisture control. And then
if you're using a bottom board, I don't see a need for that other than for comfort and height. If you're working the hive, if it's more comfortable to be raised a little bit. But if the bottom boards have, 2 rails, there's space underneath that. It's not just sitting flat. It should be okay without any sort of.
Eileen, I have colonies sitting on top of pallets that have plywood over the top.
Yeah.
And the debris does accumulate pretty well underneath there, and they're heavy, and I don't have them up on a stand. So every once in a while, I've got to pick the whole thing up and scrape the debris off. So you'll have that, and it does hold the moisture.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, the other thing that sounds concerning, you said your entry, so then people coming to your door, even with a screen there, you're going to have to deal with the flight path of bees coming and going when they're coming in the stairs, right?
The really nice thing about doing this like a virtual is you can walk outside and show someone what's happening. So here we are. Can you see my entry?
You see something, yeah.
Kind of frozen right now.
Oh, it is?
Okay, I see a mustard red hive entry. Okay.
Okay, so here are my
There we
stairs.
go.
Ta-da. Walking up here, and here's my hive over here.
What's to your right?
My house.
So how far does that
The
extend?
house.
From my house to the hive is about 10 feet.
Okay, so then they won't use that as a flight path then.
No, they're gonna
Yeah.
they're gonna go that way.
Got
Well,
it.
they're
Okay.
gonna,
They're
I
going
don't know if
that
I'd
way.
put it there. I might do that if I was facing it. Oh, you have it facing towards your neighbor's house, right?
I can turn it a little more toward their house. They're totally excited about it.
So did your neighbor open to those, do they open those windows there? Do they have
No.
those lights on at night that's going to
No.
attract them to the window?
No.
Yeah.
No, none of the above.
Mm.
No. We live in a dark world over here. Okay, Higgs, get up here. Okay, well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. The next question that doesn't look like there was an answer. It's like prevention questions came in. It looks like someone said they installed 2 nukes this spring. Should they treat from Aurora or monitor?
One, you should always monitor one just because it's a learning opportunity of what's going on in the colony. And yes, you should treat if necessary. So that's what your monitoring is going to be telling you. And so the rule is,
Jeff, I told Marcia to do a mite wash first. I can't tell you how many newbies just want to treat. And why treat if you don't know what's going on? Do the mite wash and find out whether or not you need to treat.
Right.
If you get a nuke,
you have
there's been a
30
brood
hives,
break.
so you might want to do a
Shouldn't
sampling.
have a ton of mites.
And then later on, Brian's got a question. When should they do the first Aurora check?
I say now. Now is as good a time as any. It also, you got to pay attention to like the relationship to the buildup of your colony. And if you go on Randy Oliver's website and there's like the new beekeeper learning, he has several different installments for that. You'll see the graphs and charts where he points out, here's where my bees are in their growth and how big the population is, and then where the mite population is in relative to that. And so you can glean some information there, but I would say, test at least monthly, if not more, every couple of weeks. Check your mite count. You can track that, and then treat accordingly. And again, Randy Oliver has some good threshold information on there. So generally, if you're doing the mite wash with alcohol, or since you probably can't find alcohol right now, you can use
powdered sugar.
You can use windshield wiper sugar, or I'm sorry, windshield wiper fluid. For some alternatives there. You can also do a sugar shake. You can do powdered sugar shake. It's not as accurate as sugar wash, but
Everclear. Buy some Everclear. Yeah.
Yeah, I had to do that to make some hand sanitizer actually. So, anyway, so monitoring I think is critical for your learning. Do some research on Randy Oliver's. It's a scientificbeekeeping.com that links in this presentation. And his prolific amount of information on Varroa. But generally, his threshold is if you see in your sampling of a half a cup of bees, which is about, I think, 300 bees, if you have 3 mites in that sample, then you need to be doing something because you're on the uptick of mite population in your colony. Especially a nuke that we talked about them having brood break, so they may not be as high in mites as Kathy mentioned earlier, but I just think it's important to monitor and treat. In packages, there's been some research on, mites. There's mites that are on the bees themselves. They call that phoretic mites. And those come along with your packages, unfortunately. So I know WSU did some research where they were actually treating in the package before they even installed it. They were using the hop guard strips and they found some results that were better overwintering success in the ones that they treated versus not. So package, don't assume that they're mite free. They're going to have some mites on them when you get them.
There was a question about, so it was, the name there was Randy Oliver, and I pasted in the chat the website he maintains is scientificbeekeeping.com. If you want to go there and look for his articles. Yeah. Another question here is, I've been practicing lighting a smoker and can't keep it lit for more than 15 minutes.
Well, welcome to the club.
Well, see, my sure proof way of doing it, I strip newspaper. So there's a whole bunch of different edges to catch fire, and it gets a nice hot fire to start with. Pump the bellows on it, and then slowly add whatever materials you're going to do. I like needles from the trees. Those work really well. And pine cones are good. You just have to be careful about putting anything in there that has some sort of treatment on it. Burlap can be suspect. Cardboard can be suspect. And then just, if you're not using it, I mean, I light mine, and half the time I don't use it. I have to remember to go give it a couple of puffs to keep it going. So it'll go out if you don't pump the bellows.
One really important thing too, if you have a brand new smoker, that little ring in the bottom, if you don't know this, there's 3 cutouts, and you need to bend those down so they look like table legs. And that will hold that ring up, and you'll get a lot better flow through your smoker that way, because you'll have air on the bottom all the time.
Right.
Cool. Another thing I see new beekeepers doing is they get a little bit of smoke going and they close the lid thinking they're good. And you really got to get like flames coming out the top, billowing smoke before you even think about closing the lid on it. And when you're doing all this, be cognizant you have a nylon veil typically on your face at this point. So don't be leaning over it, and that could catch fire. So be very careful of that.
I did that
Kathy
once.
mentioned, even if you're not using smoke, if you're not using the smoker, give it a couple of puffs every now and then. And I usually put mine up high somewhere when I'm not using it. So sitting on the ground, you can catch things on fire. But if you have it up high, if there's a draft of wind over that where the smoke comes out, that helps circulate air and keeps the smoke going for you. So just be aware of where you're putting it when you're not using it.
Yeah, I think my tip is, I think a lot of people rush. It takes time to light a smoker. You want to get those coals going. You want heat before you put your dampening agent in. I think people get a flame going, it bursts up real bright real quick, and then they dampen it right away, and they don't have any coals to really keep that heat going.
Right.
Yeah, and he talks about you want a cool smoke. So eventually, once you get those coals or whatever you have, your medium that you're burning really strongly lit, you don't want to just start using your smoker like that, because you can blow embers onto the bees and burn their wings. So you can put some grass on top, just a little bit to dampen, put some dampness in there, and it becomes a cool smoke that comes out. Any other tips? Questions we missed?
I think we got everything.
Cool. Well, we're just over 7:30. I don't know, unless there's any other questions, if there's scenarios or what do I do for this particular circumstance, pipe up now. All right. I'm going to give it back
Krista.
to
That's great.
it. You're welcome. Hope it was okay with the connection and everything.
Thanks, Krista. It was great.
Thank you, Krista. It was wonderful
Great job,
to
Krista.
have you host.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.
See ya.
We saying goodbye?
I'm going to stop the recording. People
Okay.
can stay